Good evening to all. In this video, we will discuss the various types of attributes. Before going to that, we will see what is meant by an attribute. From the previous videos, we understood that each entity is represented with a set of characteristics or properties. For example, if you take SID, SName, age, these are the attributes of a student entity. And here are the list of the attributes we are going to discuss one by one. One is simple attribute, and we are going to see the composite attribute, single value attribute, and multi-valued, stored attribute, and another one is derived attribute, and we are going to see prime attribute and partial attribute, and finally we will see complex attribute. Here we can see simple attribute. The name itself indicates simple attributes means the attribute is an atomic attribute. It cannot be divided into sub attributes or component attributes. So that atomic attribute is nothing but a simple attribute. For example, in this diagram, student is an entity. It has characterized by three attributes. These three are simple attributes. One is SID, another one is SName, another one is the age. This simple attribute is represented with a oval symbol. Coming to composite attribute. Composite attribute is nothing but it is a combination of component or simple attribute. That means here this is one simple attribute, this is another simple attribute, this is another simple attributes. This first name, middle name, last name, these are called as simple attributes, or it is also called as component attributes. Whereas this S name is called composite attribute. That means the composite attribute is the combination of component attributes. Next, single valued attributes. That means this attribute contains single values for an instance of an entity. Let us consider student entity. It has four attributes: SID, SName, DOB, age. In single valued attribute, for each attribute, it has only one value for an instance. And we will see one example also here for understanding. For example, you can take attribute A, attribute B, attribute C. Suppose this is one instance. For this instance, suppose it has one value, 5 is one value. Suppose it has another value. Suppose it has 7, 8. Then this is not at all considered. That means what is meant by single valued attribute? This attribute has only one value for an instance, that is called as a single valued attribute. This is multi-valued attribute. Okay, so here you can take SID also a single valued attribute, SName also a single valued attribute, date of birth also a single valued attribute, age also single valued attribute. That means sometimes attributes are considered as a simple attribute, single attribute also. Let us come to the multi-valued attributes. That means what is the meaning of the multi-valued? That attribute has many values. Okay, and here see, this multi-valued attribute is represented with a double ellipse. Am I right? Double ellipse. And here also multi-valued double ellipse. But here simple single valued attribute, only single ellipse. Am I right? In the case of multi-valued, you have more than one mobile number. Suppose you have most of them who have what happens? Two mobile numbers. Okay, that means if you have two mobile numbers, then this will be considered as a multi-valued attribute. Suppose if you have more than one mail ID, definitely we have more than one mail ID. That means mail ID and phone number will be considered as multi-valued attributes. It has more than one value. Coming to stored attribute. That means the attribute, the value is fixed. Whatever the attribute you consider, when it will be stored attribute, if it has a fixed value, then it will be considered as a stored attribute. Okay, suppose for example you can take here date of birth. Date of birth, what happens? Whenever you will see the value of the date of birth, it is fixed. That is not at all changed with respect to time. Am I right? If I will ask what is your date of birth, whenever I will ask a question, you will tell the same answer, your date of birth. But whereas coming to derived attribute, the symbol used is dashed oval. Dashed oval is the symbol for derived attribute. That means if I will ask what is your age today, then you will say one answer. If I will ask same answer in the next year, then you will add your age now plus 1, then you will get the next year age. Am I right? So that means what happens? Age, the value of age depends on date of birth. That means this value is depends on date of birth. Whenever any attribute value depends on other attributes, then that attribute is nothing but derived attribute. That means the attribute value derived from other attribute. That is the meaning of derived attribute. Okay, that is represented with the dashed oval, whereas stored attribute is represented with the simple form, that is oval. Coming to prime attribute. If you consider employee entity, here EID is there. EID is represented with underline. So whenever any attribute is represented with underline, it is called as a prime attribute. That means what it means it's a key attribute. It contains different values, unique values. Okay, so with that attribute you can identify unique records. That means with EID you can identify unique employees, individual employees. That means each employee is assigned individual employee ID. Okay, that prime attribute is nothing but a key attribute that is represented with the underline, oval with underline. Coming to partial attribute. Okay, that means here what you can say, it is a key attribute, unique values are there, but the partial attribute is represented with dashed line. Okay, dashed line. That means what happens? This dname is not a key attribute, not a prime attribute. Partial means not full. Am I right? So partial attribute means it is not a prime attribute, but we can convert this into prime attribute. That means we all know that each entity must have one primary key. So if you consider dependent entity, it is a weak entity because it doesn't have primary key. It has only partial key. That partial key we need to convert into primary key, then that particular dependent entity is converted into strong entity. This we understood in the previous video, that weak entity and strong entity. So this is about the partial attribute. Okay, complex attribute. So this complex attribute is nothing but it is a combination of composite attribute and multivalued attribute. Component means something like a name. Name is the combination of first name, middle name, last name. Similarly, address also is the combination of street, city, state. That is a composite attribute. Coming to multivalued attributes, we understood that phone number, you have many phone numbers. Mail ID also a multivalued attribute. If you consider address phone, address is nothing but a composite attribute, whereas phone number is nothing but a multivalued attribute. If you combine these two, then you can call it as a complex attribute. Now, whatever the attributes we discussed, that we are going to see at a glance. We will summarize these things. Simple attribute, it can't be divided. That means it's an atomic attribute. Whereas coming to composite attributes, it is a combination of many simple attributes. In single value attribute, it has only one value for each entity instance. Coming to multivalued attributes, it can store more than one value. That is a phone number, you understood. Stored attributes, it has a fixed value, just like a date of birth you can take. Derived attributes, you can take it as age, because age is derived from the stored attribute. Prime attributes, it is a key attribute, that is a primary key for an entity. Partial attributes, it's a non-key attribute. No doubt we need to convert that into the key attribute to identify the unique tuples for that entity, so that weak entity is converted into strong entity. Complex attributes, it's a combination of multi-value and composite attributes. This is all about all types of attributes and the symbols related to these attributes. No doubt, if you consider one attribute, it may be a stored attribute, it may be a simple attribute, it may be a single valued attribute. Okay, like that. That's why we are using the same symbol for many of the cases. This is all about the types of attributes. Okay, thank you one and all.